ever stepped into a place that felt wrong, like the air was thick with something unseen, something waiting. That's exactly what happened to me back in October 2015. My girlfriend, Sailor, and I had a thing for exploring abandoned places. Not because we were adrenaline junkies, but because there was something hauntingly beautiful about forgotten spaces. The eerie stillness, the echoes of a life left behind. It pulled us in, but that day, that house, it pulled back. We had seen the old farmhouse countless times during our weekend drives. A decaying skeleton of wood and shattered glass standing against the empty fields. It had that eerie, lonely charm, the kind that makes your skin crawl, but your curiosity burn. Sailor was already grinning when I slowed the car. "Should we?" she asked, eyes gleaming with mischief. I grinned back. "Let's do it." We parked a few hundred feet away and made our way up the overgrown path. The weeds clawed at our jeans as if trying to hold us back. The house loomed over us, its warped wooden boards creaking under the weight of time. As we stepped onto the sagging porch, the silence thickened, the kind that presses against your ears, making your own breathing sound too loud. "You go first," Sailor whispered, nudging me. I pushed the door open. It groaned, long and low, like something waking up. Dust swirled in the dim light. Broken furniture lay scattered like remnants of a life abandoned in a hurry. A tarnished mirror hung crookedly on the wall, reflecting nothing but darkness. Sailor snapped pictures as I walked ahead. The walls, once covered in patterned wallpaper, were now peeling like old skin. Faded family portraits stared at us, faces blurred by time and dust. And then we reached the kitchen. A rusted refrigerator stood in the corner, its door slightly ajar. The stove, ancient and dust-covered, seemed frozen in time. Through a cracked window above the sink, we could see the vast stretch of empty fields. "Imagine living here," Sailor murmured. I tried to. Kids laughing, the smell of dinner cooking, a family sitting at this very table. But the air felt heavy, like the house didn't want to be remembered. Still, we pressed on. The stairs creaked under our weight, each step feeling more like a warning. Upstairs, the decay was even worse. Moldy mattresses, broken furniture, and air that smelled thick with rot. Sailor wandered into a bedroom, running her fingers over a dusty vanity. "This place is seriously creepy." She chuckled nervously. I forced a laugh, but deep down, I felt it too. Like we weren't alone. And then, she stopped, phone raised, face pale. "Did you see that?" she whispered. She pointed to the window across the room. "I swear I saw someone, a face, watching us from upstairs, before we even came in." I turned, my heart thudding. Outside, nothing but empty fields stretching into the dying light. "It's probably just shadows," I muttered, though my voice lacked conviction. We left soon after. Something about the house felt done with us. But let me ask you something. If you took a picture of a supposedly empty house and later saw a face staring out of the window, would you go back, or would you let it stay a mystery? Tell me in the comments. The next day, in broad daylight, we returned. The house looked less menacing in the sun, but that didn't stop the feeling in my gut, the one screaming at me to stay away. We went straight to the upstairs room, the window where Sailor had seen the face. The dust was thick, the air stale, but then Sailor gasped, "Look, by the window." In the dust, a single set of footprints, leading from the window and back out the door. They were fresh. We froze. The realization clawed at my spine. Someone or something had been there, watching. Then a sound, a faint creak from behind us, like a footstep. We spun around. The hallway was empty. Without another word, we bolted down the stairs, out the door. We didn't stop, didn't look back. As we sped away, Sailor looked back one last time. "Did you see it?" she whispered. I didn't want to, but I did. A pale face, expressionless, watching from that same window. Even now when I drive past that road, I see it, waiting. And I know, without a doubt, that day, we were not alone. If you were in our shoes, would you have gone back? Or would you have left the mystery unsolved? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed terrifying true stories, stay tuned, because some places, they never truly let you leave. Have you ever been somewhere that just felt wrong? Like the walls themselves held secrets, secrets that weren't meant to be uncovered? I was a nurse at a small-town hospital, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Most nights it felt safe, familiar, but then there were nights when the hospital whispered its own stories. And the top floor? That was where those whispers turned into something else. The psychiatric ward had been shut down for years. No patients, no staff, just an abandoned floor with a past no one wanted to talk about. Everyone had heard the stories, shadows that moved on their own, doors locking themselves, and that one voice, the one that sometimes called out for help. I never believed in ghost stories, but that changed the night I stepped inside. It started with a loose lock. The janitor mentioned how it kept coming undone, no matter how many times he secured it. That night, curiosity got the best of me. The hospital was quiet, my shift was slow, and something inside me needed to know if the stories were true. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed the stairs to the top floor. With every step, the air grew colder. The hallway stretched before me, dim and unsettling. A crooked sign dangled from the door handle. Ward closed. It felt like a warning. I hesitated, my pulse quickening. But I convinced myself it was just an abandoned floor. Nothing more. With a deep breath, I turned the knob. The door creaked open, revealing a pitch-black corridor lined with doors. I stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the thick, dusty air. The walls were cracked, paint peeling like dead skin. The stench of mold and something stale, something wrong, hung heavy in the air. Old posters lined the walls, their faded messages about hope and recovery, now just cruel echoes of the past. That's when I saw it. At the very end of the hall stood a single reinforced door. Unlike the others, it was still intact, sealed tight. But what made my stomach drop were the deep, jagged scratch marks around the edges, as if someone had been clawing to get out. Imagine you're in my place. You're standing in a forgotten ward, alone. There's a locked door in front of you, with fresh claw marks on it. And then, somewhere in the darkness, you hear a voice whisper, "Help me." Would you stay and investigate? Or would you run? Let me know in the comments. Now, let me tell you what I did. I should have left. I wanted to leave, but something about that voice, it didn't sound distant. It sounded close, like whoever, or whatever, was whispering was just inches away from the other side of the door. I reached for the handle. It was ice cold. It didn't budge. Suddenly, tap, tap, tap. A soft knocking sound echoed down the hallway. I spun around, flashlight shaking. The corridor was empty. Then the knocking grew louder. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from one of the doors behind me. I swallowed hard, stepping closer. My ears strained to listen. The knocking stopped. A new sound took its place. Scratching, slow, deliberate, like fingernails dragging across wood. I felt a chill slither down my spine. My breath hitched as I aimed my flashlight at the door. It was shut, but something inside was moving. Then, "Please let me out," a whisper, directly behind the door. I stumbled backward, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't my imagination. This was real. And then, just as I turned to run, laughter, high-pitched, childlike, it echoed down the corridor, surrounding me. And it wasn't coming from one direction. It was coming from everywhere. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the stairwell, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But even as I threw open the door, I heard it one last time. That laughter, faint, echoing, following me. I never went back to that ward. But the next day, when I told the older nurses what had happened, one of them, Helen, gave me a knowing look. "You heard her, didn't you?" "Her?" I asked. Helen's expression darkened. "Decades ago, there was a young woman in room 306. She never left, and some say she still hasn't." My stomach twisted. The tapping, the whispers, the laughter. Helen continued. "That's her. She's still calling out, waiting for someone to listen." That night, as I walked past the hospital's darkened hallways, I felt it, a presence. Watching, waiting, and though I'll never admit it out loud, sometimes, just for a second, I swear I still hear her. Tap, tap, tap. If you've made it this far, well, let me ask you again. What would you have done? Would you have opened the door? Or would you have run like I did? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more terrifying stories like this, make sure to subscribe. Until next time, don't listen to the whispers. Abandoned places have always fascinated me. There's something about them, silent, forgotten, yet still holding on to their past, that calls to me. Maybe it's the mystery, maybe it's the thrill, or maybe it's something else entirely. Something darker. That's why, when my girlfriend Mia heard about the old Harrington Manor, a sprawling estate left to rot on the edge of town, we couldn't resist. People had whispered about it for years. Some said a fire had forced the owners out. Others spoke of a tragedy, a murder, or maybe something worse. Mia's family had known about it but never dared to explore. That was all the motivation we needed. We pulled up the long, winding driveway just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The mansion was massive, its towering stone walls tangled with ivy, its windows shattered and gaping like hollow eyes. Mia hesitated, gripping the steering wheel. "Are we really doing this?" I grinned. "Come on, we didn't drive all this way just to chicken out." She laughed, nervously, but grabbed her camera. "Right, it's just bigger than I expected." I opened my door, the cool evening air thick with the scent of damp earth. "Let's go meet the ghosts." The front door hung slightly open, like it had been waiting for us. The wood was warped, dark with age. As I pushed it open, the creaking echoed through the empty hallways. Mia clicked on her flashlight. Dust swirled in the beam. The air smelled of mildew and something older. Something that made my skin prickle. "Guess no one's been here in a while," Mia murmured, snapping a picture of the peeling wallpaper. "Imagine this place, back in the day," I said, trying to lighten the mood. Full of life, music, laughter, but now it was just silence. Shadows stretched long in the dim light. We wandered from room to room, each one emptier than the last. The portraits on the walls watched us, old aristocrats with hollow eyes that seemed to follow our every move. And then we reached the ballroom. The room was vast, a domed ceiling stretching high above us. A wall of grimy windows let in just enough twilight to cast eerie shadows across the dust-covered floor. And in the center of the room sat a grand piano. Its polished wood had faded with time, its keys yellowed, but it stood as if waiting for someone to play. "That must be the famous piano," Mia whispered. She approached cautiously, reaching out a hand to brush the keys. A small puff of dust rose into the air. "Don't suppose you know how to play?" I teased. She smirked. "Only if you want to hear chopsticks." I chuckled. Guess that's not happening, but I couldn't resist. I reached out and pressed a single key. The sound rang out, low and hollow. It echoed through the ballroom, sending a chill down my spine. Still in tune, and that's when I saw it. A handprint. Small, smudged into the dust across the keys. I stared. "Mia, did you do that?" She shook her head slowly. "No. Did you?" I swallowed hard. Maybe it's just old dust that got disturbed or something. Neither of us believed it. Then the piano played a note by itself, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the room. Mia grabbed my arm. You're messing with me, right? I shook my head. The keys were untouched. The sound lingered in the air, clear and sharp. The air felt heavier. The room colder. And then Mia's flashlight flickered. She gasped, spinning toward the far end of the room. Did you see that? See what? She pointed, her hand trembling. By the door. I swear I saw someone standing there. I squinted into the shadows. Nothing. Just the faint outline of the doorway. Probably just your mind playing tricks, I muttered. But my gut said otherwise. We needed to leave. But before we move on, let me ask you this. If you heard a piano play by itself in an abandoned house, would you run immediately? Or would you stay to find out what played it? Tell me in the comments. I need to know if I'm just paranoid or if you'd be just as curious as I was. We turned to leave, but something made me look back. And in that split second, I saw it, a figure, tall, thin, standing by the piano. My heart stopped. I blinked and it was gone. Mia pulled at my sleeve. Let's go. Now, we moved quickly through the house. The hallways felt darker, like the walls were closing in. Every footstep echoed unnaturally loud. Do you think? Mia whispered. This was a mistake. I wanted to say no, that we were just freaking ourselves out, but I couldn't. Let's just get to the car. We reached the front door. I stepped onto the porch. And then we heard it, a whisper, faint. Too quiet to understand, but enough to freeze us in place. Mia turned to me, her face pale. Did you hear that? I couldn't speak. And then another sound. Footsteps from inside the house, running toward us. We bolted to the car, throwing ourselves inside and locking the doors. Mia's hands shook on the steering wheel. What the hell was that? She whispered. I stared back at the mansion. The dark, empty windows. The front door, still open, but the whisper and those footsteps. I took a shaky breath. I don't know. She started the car. We're not coming back here. Agreed. As we pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for just a second, I saw a silhouette standing in the doorway, watching us leave. That night, as I lay in bed, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. But then, a single piano note, faint, distant. I sat up, heart pounding. The house was miles away, yet the sound lingered. It's funny how places can leave a mark on you, how they stay with you, even when you think you've left them behind. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, I picture that ballroom, the dusty keys, the handprint that hadn't been there before. And I wonder, was it a warning or a call, pulling us back to something we were never meant to understand? If you made it this far, I have one last question for you. If you could visit an abandoned mansion, knowing it might be haunted, would you still go? Or would you stay far, far away? Let me know in the comments. And if you hear a piano play by itself tonight, well, maybe don't look back. I've driven past the old mansion hundreds of times, always wondering what stories its cracked walls could tell. It stood there, grand yet decayed, hiding behind gnarled trees and a rusting iron gate. But what was strange was that it didn't seem to exist. No records, no history, no owner. It was like a ghost of a house, sitting there in plain sight. One rainy Friday night, after months of daring each other, I finally convinced my friend Matt to explore it with me. Matt, always up for a thrill, grinned as we stood outside the gate. "Just a quick look," he said. "No big deal." As we stepped onto the overgrown path, a heavy silence fell over us. The mansion loomed ahead, dark, watching. We climbed the steps, and before I could second-guess myself, Matt pushed open the heavy wooden door. It groaned like something waking from a long slumber. Inside, the air was thick, stale. Sheets draped over old furniture like ghostly figures frozen in time. A chandelier dangled above us, its crystals dull and lifeless. Matt flicked on his flashlight. "Let's see what we're working with." We moved carefully, room by room. The dining hall had an impossibly long table, chairs perfectly positioned as if waiting for guests who would never arrive. And then I felt it, that creeping sensation of being watched. I turned, my flashlight catching something at the edge of my vision. A figure, white, motionless, standing in the next room. "Matt," I whispered. "Do you see that?" He nodded, swallowing hard. The figure stood stiff, unnatural, draped in a flowing white dress. My first thought was a mannequin, but something was wrong. Before we could step closer, Matt and I exchanged a look. He whispered, "Did you?" But before he could finish, "Okay, real talk. If you were in my place right now, would you chase after it or run the hell out of there? Let me know in the comments, because at this point, we made a choice I'm not sure I'd make again." We followed the sound down a narrow hallway. At the end, a sweeping staircase spiraled into darkness. Then I saw it, a flash of white, disappearing around the corner at the top of the stairs. "Upstairs," Matt whispered. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I nodded, and we climbed. Each step groaned under our weight. The hallway at the top was lined with doors, each one slightly ajar, except for one. A door at the very end, closed, with one word carved into the wood: nursery. Matt smirked, trying to shake the nerves. "This should be interesting." He pushed it open. Inside, a rocking chair sat by the window, still, silent, until we stepped inside. We froze. My flashlight trembled in my grip. Then I saw them. Footprints, fresh, in the dust, leading from the rocking chair, straight toward us. I turned to Matt, my voice barely a breath. "We need to leave, now." We spun. And there she was, standing in the doorway, white dress, long dark hair covering her face. She took a step forward. We ran. We bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping in our desperation. We crashed through the front door, sprinted across the yard, and didn't stop until we reached the car. Neither of us spoke on the drive home. But something had changed. Even now, days later, I can feel that house, like it left a mark on me. Not a curse, not a ghost following me home, but a warning. Some places are abandoned for a reason, and some doors should never be opened. If this sent chills down your spine, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life horror. But now I gotta ask you, have you ever explored somewhere you weren't supposed to? Did you feel like you weren't alone? Drop your creepiest experience in the comments below. And remember, some things might just be waiting for you to look away. Have you ever seen a house so empty, yet so full of something else? A house that just feels wrong. If you have, you already know what we felt that night. We called it the ghost house. For years, this unfinished two-story house sat in the middle of a dying neighborhood, abandoned, rotting, and waiting. No one moved in, no one fixed it. It just sat there. The street it was on wasn't much better. Most houses looked deserted, their yards swallowed by tall grass and weeds. That night, my friends, Jenny, Luca, Kylie, and I were just driving around, killing time. We grabbed some fast food, talked about nothing, until Luca, in his usual reckless way, threw out an idea. "Let's check out the ghost house. For real this time." The girls were immediately on board, and if they were in, so was I. We parked a few houses down. The street had only one flickering streetlight casting long, twitching shadows. Most houses had no lights on. It felt like we had stepped into a place that had been forgotten. Or maybe a place that wanted to be forgotten. We crept towards the house, keeping our voices low. Up close, it looked even worse. Its skeletal frame exposed, gaping windows like empty eye sockets. The front door, locked, but after circling the house, testing every window, we found one that slid open. Jenny, being the smallest, climbed in first. A moment later, she unlocked the back door for us. "Only come." The lock was already undone. Someone had been here, or was still inside. The smell hit us first, a mix of rotting wood, mildew, and something sharper, something foul. The first floor was eerily intact. Empty rooms stretched in every direction, shadows clinging to the walls. We split up without thinking, each of us drawn in different directions. I took the stairs. Upstairs was more unfinished. Bare wooden beams, exposed insulation. The whole place felt wrong, like something was hiding just out of sight. I heard rustling downstairs, my friends whispering, their voices bouncing off the empty walls. And then, something else, a noise that wasn't them. I turned quickly, heart pounding, but there was nothing, just the house, settling. "Right?" Jenny called up to me. "What's up there?" "Nothing much, just unfinished rooms." But she went up anyway, so I kept moving. That's when I found the basement door. The second I opened it, the stench slammed into me, stronger, sharper, like ammonia, but worse. I hesitated. Then I stepped inside. The basement was different, darker. The walls seemed to breathe, and the floor was stained, dark, rusty brown patches spreading like old wounds. Paint? Or something else? In the corner, something stood out. A small wooden chair and a table. On it, a single object, a Bible. I frowned, stepping closer. Why would a Bible be left here of all places? Then footsteps. I turned, expecting to see Jenny or Luca. No one. The hair on my neck rose. "Yo, come check this out." Silence. A slow, crawling realization crept over me. I wasn't alone. Against the far wall, something shifted. A figure. A woman, sitting, her back against the wall, hair long and tangled, her face wrong, too pale, too still, and she was staring at me. Think for a second. What would you do if you saw someone sitting in an abandoned house like this? Would you run? Would you speak to them? Comment below. Because what happens next will make you question everything. A scream tore through the house. Jenny, then Luca's voice, sharp and panicked. "Run!" I bolted. Footsteps thundered above, my friends already fleeing. I barely glanced back. But in that last second, they swear, she moved. I hit the stairs, taking them two at a time, my breath ragged. The back door slammed open, and we sprinted to the car. Only once we were inside, doors locked, did we finally speak. I gasped. "What the hell did you guys see?" Kylie, shaking, looked at me. "Two men, standing in one of the rooms." Luca added, "There was something on the floor near them. We couldn't see what it was. We just ran." I felt cold all over. I saw a woman in the basement. We drove away in silence, leaving the ghost house behind. To this day, I don't know who or what was in that house. A cult? Something supernatural? Or something worse? Something that wasn't supposed to be seen? One thing's for sure. You couldn't pay me to go back. It was a peaceful summer night in the suburbs, the kind where the air felt thick with silence and the streets seemed deserted. The neighborhood was always like this, quiet, safe, and isolated. You'd never expect anything sinister to happen here. It was the last place anyone would associate with anything dangerous. At least, that's what we thought. This happened a few summers ago, and though I've tried to forget, there's no way to erase the images from my mind. It's funny how time can warp memories, how something so familiar can suddenly feel off. My friend Chaz and I were the kind of kids who always found ways to cause trouble. Looking back, I'm not sure if it was teenage rebellion or just plain stupidity. We lived on the same street and hung out every day. Our neighborhood was huge, filled with massive houses and towering trees. But despite the wide streets and manicured lawns, there was nothing to do here. So, we made our own fun. At the top of the hill, there stood an old mansion. It was abandoned, had been for as long as anyone could remember. The windows were shattered, the walls sprayed with layers of graffiti. The mansion's eerie presence made it stand out. But it was especially creepy because it was right next to a huge cemetery. For Chaz and me, The mansion was our default hangout. If we had nothing else to do, we'd sneak in, spray paint the walls, or just sit on the roof and let time pass us by. One night, around 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, we were bored and a little drunk. We'd been stood up by a couple of girls we were supposed to meet, and in our frustration, we decided to take it out on the mansion. We figured throwing rocks at it was as good a way as any to blow off some steam. We didn't think it was a good idea to drive, so we walked the 20 minutes to the hilltop. As we crested the hill, the mansion came into view. Vines wrapped around the house and broken glass littered the ground. The roof had sharp, menacing points. It was as sinister as it was familiar, especially at this ungodly hour. Without hesitation, Chaz grabbed a rock and threw it at one of the windows. It shattered with a loud, deafening crash. The sound sent a jolt through me, but I couldn't help but laugh. I picked up a rock and smashed another window on the second floor. Then Chaz looked up at the attic window, the highest point of the house, and challenged me to hit it. I threw several times, missing every shot. But then Chaz took the rock, lined up his shot, and launched it. The rock sailed through the air and shattered the attic window with a satisfying crash. That's when I saw it. A dark shape flew out of the shattered window, sailing straight toward us. I froze. The rock, the exact same rock, landed right in front of us, with a distinct Z-shaped mark on one side. It was the rock Chaz had just thrown. For a moment, neither of us said anything. We were shaken, but our minds raced. There had to be an explanation. Maybe other kids were messing with us, right? But the idea excited us. Maybe we could get the drop on them. So we decided to investigate. We crept towards the front door. It was always slightly ajar, thanks to years of neglect. The smell of mildew and rotting wood hit us the moment we stepped inside. We made our way up the stairs, carefully avoiding the creaking wood beneath our feet. We had never ventured this far into the house before, but we were eager to explore. When we reached the top, we saw a small wooden door leading to the attic. Chaz pushed the door open, and before we could even process what was inside, a wave of foul, decaying air hit us. I took a few steps back, but Chaz was already in. The room was small, and the floor was covered in a white pentagram. Candles sat unlit on the ground, and there was a closet door on the far side. The stench seemed to be coming from inside. I turned to leave, but that's when I saw them. Two cloaked figures stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking straight up at me. I panicked, but before I could react, I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate stomping, getting closer. We had no time to think. Chaz bolted for the shattered window, clambering onto the roof, and I followed him. We ran across the roof, hearts pounding, not daring to look back. The hatch to the roof entrance was locked. I could hear them getting closer. They were chasing us. The booming voice that rang out from the distance was so deep, so unnatural, it made my blood run cold. They went that way. The voice was a guttural growl. We had no choice. I kicked the hatch with all my strength, and it flew open, sending me tumbling into the ladder. Pain shot through my leg, but I didn't care. Chaz screamed at me to go, and I climbed down as quickly as I could. We sprinted to the back door, jumped over the fence, and dove into the cemetery. We hid behind a gravestone, panting, watching the mansion. For a moment, everything was still. But then we saw them, a group of 4 or 5 cloaked figures, circling the mansion. They were searching under bushes, behind trees, frantically looking for us. Think about it. What kind of people, or things, would be out there in the middle of the night, searching for us in an abandoned mansion next to a cemetery? Do you think they were just teens messing around? Or is something far darker at play here? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm curious to hear your theories. After what felt like hours of hiding, we finally made our move. We snuck through the back fence and we never went back to that mansion. To this day, I have no idea who or what we encountered that night, but I'll never forget the look in those cloaked figures' eyes, or that voice that still haunts me. I think we stumbled onto something much worse than we could have ever imagined. It was 2017, and I was deep into my college days, rushing a frat. It was near the end of the pledge process, and as a tradition, my entire pledge class was about to embark on a trip to an abandoned hospital in a town a few miles away. Everyone was buzzing with excitement, but I wasn't. In fact, I'd rather have been anywhere else. I carpooled with a few of my pledge brothers, but there's honestly too many to name. The one I'll mention here, though, is Joshua. He and I stuck together the entire night. We pulled into a parking lot beside a big park, where everyone else had already gathered. The eerie stillness of the night hit us all at once. After a bit of waiting, we started walking down a dim pathway, heading in the direction of the hospital. The path led us right into a small patch of woods, separating the park from the hospital grounds. I'll admit it, I was wearing my white Air Force Ones, and the thick mud wasn't doing me any favors. I kept complaining, but my words faded away into the chill of the night. Finally, we arrived at the hospital, surrounded by dark trees and a dilapidated parking lot. The building loomed over us, tall and imposing, a shadow of what it once was. What once held life now stood cold and lifeless in the dark. I'd never seen anything like it before. A few of the guys knew the ropes, including the way in, climbing through a smashed window on the lower floor. One by one, we squeezed through the window into the basement, our feet landing on wet, cold floors. My shoes were already ruined. I grimaced but kept moving. Joshua and I fell toward the back of the group, slowly walking behind as the others led the way. It wasn't long before the noise of our footsteps started echoing through the building. The place was abandoned for decades, dusty, decaying. But what shocked me was the lack of graffiti. Most places like this are tagged up, but here, it was eerily quiet. We began to split up. Small groups veered off to explore different parts of the hospital. Joshua and I found ourselves in a corridor on the second floor, away from the rest of the group. As we ventured deeper, some of the rooms had clearly been untouched since the place shut down. Beds still lying there, medical equipment gathering dust. Others looked like they'd been ransacked. It was in one of these rooms that we heard something. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, almost like they were waiting for us. A figure appeared at the doorway, just out of the corner of my eye. It was a shadow, but it was clear someone was walking past. Joshua and I froze. "Who's there?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it moved swiftly into the next room, vanishing into the darkness. "Yo, Joshua, you saw that, right?" I asked, my voice trembling. Joshua nodded, his face pale. We both knew what we had seen wasn't normal. "Let's go back," I suggested, my gut twisting. We turned and quickly made our way back down the corridor, trying to ignore the increasing sense of dread creeping up my spine. We could hear faint voices in the distance, our pledge brothers, still exploring. Suddenly, there was a loud, blood-curdling scream. It was unlike anything I've ever heard before. A woman, screaming in agony, like she was being brutally stabbed to death. I could feel the hair on my neck stand up. The voices of our friends stopped. The scream echoed through the halls, growing louder and more desperate. What we didn't realize was that the scream wasn't the only sound now. There were footsteps, heavy, unmistakable. They weren't our friends. They were coming from behind us. I grabbed Joshua's arm, and we broke into a run, heading back toward the sound of our friends. But the footsteps were getting closer, much closer. We reached the group, shouting, "Go! Now!" Panic filled the air. Everyone turned, eyes wide with fear, and we bolted for the exit. We rushed back down to the lower level where we had entered. One by one, we crawled out through the window. But just as I was about to squeeze out, I heard it. The stomping of footsteps. They were right behind me. I feared for a moment that something or someone would reach out and grab me. Finally, I scrambled out of the window and we sprinted back toward the cars, hearts racing. We caught our breath, huddled together by the cars, and I told everyone what I had seen. The shadowy figure, the screams, the footsteps that weren't our own. But it didn't end there. No one had heard the screams, except for us. What do you think was following us that night? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Was it just the adrenaline playing tricks on us? Or did we actually encounter something alive, something not human? Imagine it, an abandoned motel, long forgotten by time, sitting quietly in the hot desert night. It's called the Royal Hawaiian Motel, located in the eerie town of Baker, California. What was once a bustling rest stop is now nothing more than a hollow shell, its walls echoing with whispers of the past. But tonight, it will reveal something far darker. I often do solo urban explorations, especially at night when the world is asleep. The Royal Hawaiian Motel had been abandoned for over a decade. No one came here anymore. The heat in the daytime was unbearable, so I decided to explore it at night, when the temperature was just bearable. It was a simple task. Park my car, grab my backpack, and head straight for the motel. The silence at night was suffocating. I parked along the side of the road and made my way towards the motel. No fences, no security. It was one of the easiest places I'd ever explored. The back of the motel had a deep, neglected pool, covered in graffiti, a sign of what this place had turned into over the years. I shined my flashlight upwards and noticed that half of the upstairs doors were either ajar or completely shattered. It gave off a creepy, decaying vibe, but that was expected for a place that had been abandoned for so long. To my left, I saw a section of the motel that looked like it had been burned down, the remnants of a fire still clinging to the walls like a bad memory. As I walked around the exterior, the eerie stillness was broken only by the sound of my shoes crunching over debris. But then something broke that silence. A voice, a woman's voice. I froze. It wasn't just the voice, it was the timing. The place was supposed to be empty. I thought it was empty. The voice echoed from somewhere near the back of the motel, almost like it was calling to me. My first instinct in situations like this is to hide. Could it be another explorer? Or worse, a security guard or even a person trying to cause trouble? So I did what I always do. I ducked into a room on the ground floor, shut off my flashlight, and waited. My heart was pounding in my chest. But then, nothing. No more voices. I waited a bit longer, then turned the light back on. Here's where it gets real. The room I was in had only a dusty old mattress and a dresser, barely standing on its own. There were scribbled words on the walls, chaotic and unrecognizable, but something felt off. As I stepped back into the hallway, I heard a loud crash coming from upstairs. My blood ran cold. Was it just a falling object, or was something or someone up there? I knew I had to investigate. I cautiously made my way upstairs. The floor creaked under my weight, each step echoing through the empty building. And then I heard it. Bang, thump, bang. A slow rhythmic thumping, a noise that didn't belong. I followed the sound down the dimly lit corridor. My pulse quickened with every step. Then just as I reached the door where the sound seemed to come from, it stopped. I hesitated. The silence was deafening. I peered inside the room with my flashlight off, cautiously adjusting the beam. The room was nearly pitch black, but I could make out a figure, a shape, moving slowly near the back wall. It was only when I shifted my flashlight lower, just a few inches, that I saw it. Bare feet, pale, dirty. The sight of her, her bloodied forehead, and the yellowish substance dripping from her mouth. It was something from a nightmare. I did what anyone would do. I ran. As I sprinted down the stairs, I could hear her scream, her voice chasing after me. The sound didn't fade, which meant one horrifying thing. She was following me. I was terrified. Was she a person or something else? Was she mentally unstable? Or could this place have something more sinister lurking within it? What do you think happened to her? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I need to know. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I just ran all the way back to my car. The eerie feeling of her chase stayed with me, but I was lucky. She didn't follow me that far. After I caught my breath, I called my friend George, who also does urban exploration. I had invited him to come with me, but he couldn't make it. When I told him everything that happened, we came to a disturbing conclusion. The thumping I heard, that was her. She was banging her head against the wall, which explained the blood. We debated whether I should call the police, but here's the thing. If I reported her, I'd have to explain how I got there in the first place. Trespassing. That was a risk I wasn't willing to take, but something still bugs me. I drove around the area looking for a payphone to anonymously call for help, but there's no such thing anymore. So I ended up calling the non-emergency number and vaguely reported a deranged woman. Did the police ever investigate? I never found out. All I know is I'll never go back there, ever. The Royal Hawaiian Motel still stands today, decaying further into the sands of time. But I can't help but wonder, is it really just the building that's haunted, or is something more sinister hiding in the shadows, waiting for the next explorer to make the same mistake I did? If you enjoyed this terrifying story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And share your theories about what happened to the woman in the comments below. I'll be reading them all. It was supposed to be an adventure, a way to break free from the chaos of everyday life. My family had just moved to a new town, trying to escape the constant drama of our old home. While my parents were away house hunting, I invited my friend over and called up my cousins. We were looking for something terrifying to experience, something that would make our blood run cold. And that's when I heard about Bryce Hospital. You've probably never heard of it, but trust me, you'd wish you didn't. It was an abandoned psychiatric hospital, deep in the woods. The kind of place where rumors of mistreatment and tortured souls never seemed to fade. When it shut down, the decay set in, leaving behind nothing but walls rotting with dark history. A perfect spot for a bunch of reckless teens like us, right? We didn't think twice. We packed into the car and set off at 11 p.m., aiming to get there by 2 a.m. But what we didn't know was that the terror that awaited us was going to be far worse than we could have ever imagined. The car ride was filled with laughs and nervous energy. We were all so hyped up, joking about what we'd find. But the further we drove, the darker the road became. By the time we hit the dirt path that led to the hospital, it felt like something had shifted in the air. The trees crowded around us, their branches stretching toward the car like hands. The darkness swallowed everything. After a long, tense silence, we finally saw it. The old building loomed in front of us, its rotting roof barely clinging on and vines wrapping themselves around the walls like they were trying to pull it back into the ground. The parking lot was nothing but a distant memory, with an overgrown fountain standing eerily in the center, long forgotten by time. We got out of the car, hearts racing, as we ventured into the building. The first thing that hit me was the spray-painted pentagrams on the walls, symbols of the madness that had once lived here. But we didn't stop. We kept going, creeping through the hallways until we found a ladder that led to the roof, and that's when I saw it. A light in the distance, moving like a phone flashlight. My cousin called out to it, but it disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. "Guys, let's move to another room," my cousin said, but something in me told me we were already in over our heads. I wandered into a nearby room on my own, unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The air was thick with decay. Old mattresses were stacked in the corners, and more graffiti covered the walls. Then I heard something, a faint noise. It sounded like a rock being thrown at the window. I spun around, but there was nothing. I didn't know it then, but that was just the beginning. We regrouped and decided to check out the basement. The stairs were barely there, crumbling beneath our feet as we made our way down. The air grew cold, and the silence was oppressive. And then we heard it, a voice, soft at first, but unmistakable. It was coming from the back of the room. My cousin moved toward it, shining his light into the darkness. What he saw made his blood run cold. A man, hunched over, staring at the wall, was sitting there in the shadows. My cousin backed up, still shining the light, but the man didn't move. We thought maybe he was just lost, or worse, crazy. But then the silence shattered. The man turned toward us, his eyes empty and lifeless. His face twisted into an expression of pure rage, and without a second's hesitation, he screamed. A scream that seemed to rip through the very walls of the building. And then he started running at us. We bolted, no plan, no direction. We ran as fast as we could, not knowing if we were being chased by something worse than just a man. My cousins were ahead, their flashlights fading into the night. I could hear his footsteps behind me, closer, closer. We finally found a trail that led us back to the car, but something in the bushes rustled. A rock flew out, hitting my friend. We froze, out from the shadows. It was him, the man. We ran for our lives, jumping into the car and slamming the doors shut just in time. But as we started the car, something happened that I'll never forget. The headlights flashed on, illuminating the man, now running full speed at us, his hands banging against the windows with a glass bottle. And just like that, we sped off, the sound of his pounding fists still echoing in our ears. Now I have to ask you this. What do you think happened to that man? Was he just a deranged soul haunting the building or something darker? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And remember, this isn't just a story. Some places still remember. It was the summer of 2005, and I was 15, tagging along with my older brother, Seb, who was 18. Seb had a thing for exploring creepy places, and I was always roped into his wild adventures. One day, he came home excited, telling me about an enormous abandoned house he'd heard about. Someone he knew had mentioned it. And of course, Seb couldn't resist. The house was out in the countryside of Georgia, way off the beaten path. Seb didn't want to explore it alone, so naturally, he brought me with him. We drove out there, the sun just starting to dip behind the trees, casting a dim orange glow over everything. Seb parked the car in a secluded spot, hidden by a thick cluster of trees. From here, the house was nowhere in sight. We'd have to walk down a narrow concrete road, clearly untouched for decades. Cracks split the road open, and weeds had taken over, crawling up through the fractures. The tall grass around us felt like it was swallowing everything up, suffocating the land. And then, I noticed something. A woman was walking behind us. She was walking with both hands folded behind her back, as if she were just out for a peaceful stroll in the woods. I nudged Seb, asking what we should do. He shot me a quick glance and whispered, "Just play it cool. Don't run. We don't want to look suspicious." So we kept walking, keeping a steady pace, though I could feel my heart pick up speed with each step. I glanced behind me again. She was closer now. Her smile was unsettling, like it didn't quite match the way she walked. There was something wrong about it. She was watching me, and then in a voice that sent a chill straight to my bones, she said, "Lovely day today, isn't it?" Seb and I froze. almost in sync, but we forced out a quiet, "Yeah," before continuing our walk. She kept following, getting closer, her hands still tucked behind her back, her footsteps oddly light for someone who seemed out of place in the woods. We didn't speak for a while, both of us too uncomfortable to break the silence. The tension was building like a heavy fog, but then she said something that made my blood run cold. "I have to go to bed now." We exchanged a quick, nervous look. My heart was pounding now. The woman was almost on top of us. Without saying a word, we both started walking faster. Seb turned back to her one last time, a forced smile on his face, and said, "Have a great day, ma'am." We quickened our pace, even more, not daring to look back, though I could feel her presence creeping behind us. The worst part? The moment we turned back to check, she was gone, completely vanished. She couldn't have just disappeared like that. She had to have gone off into the woods, blending into the trees like she wasn't even real. We made it to the house after what felt like an eternity. The mansion loomed in front of us, decaying and forgotten, as if it had been abandoned for centuries. Ivy crawled up the crumbling walls, some windows shattered like they'd been punched in from the inside. People had definitely been here before. We climbed in through one of the broken windows, careful not to cut ourselves. The inside of the house was bizarrely untouched. Furniture was still in place, though it looked weathered and neglected, covered in dust. Even the kitchen seemed frozen in time. Rotted food in the fridge that stank so badly, I almost gagged. After we explored the first floor, we decided to check the basement. It was furnished too, but much messier. Papers scattered on the floor, broken items everywhere. There was a faded blue carpet, the smell of mildew hanging heavy in the air. And then we heard it, a thump. We both froze. Another thump. We looked at each other, panic rising. "Probably just the house settling," Seb whispered, though I could see the fear in his eyes. We left the basement and headed back up to the first floor. The only place left was the second floor. We climbed the stairs cautiously, the air thick with an uncomfortable silence. At the top of the stairs, there was a bathroom directly ahead. To the left, a hallway with an open door to another bedroom. And further down, a sharp turn to what I assumed was another room. But I never saw what was to the right, and that's because we went left. The bedroom was unremarkable, just a double bed, an old dresser, and clothes scattered in the drawers. It felt normal until Seb stepped out, looking pale as a ghost. I followed him into the hallway and saw what he was looking at. There, standing in the doorway of the next room, was her. The woman from the road. That same chilling smile. Her hands were still folded behind her back, and she wasn't moving. She simply stared at us. Without a word, she opened her mouth and said, "Do you want to see what's behind my back?" At that moment, my brother screamed, "Run!" He shoved me out of the way, and we bolted for the front door. I didn't dare look back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was right behind us, following our every step. We finally made it outside, gasping for breath, and I couldn't help but glance back toward the house. No one was at the window. She wasn't chasing us, but I still couldn't shake the unease in my gut. What had been behind her back? We didn't stop running until we reached the car. I was gasping for air, my legs screaming in protest. As Seb drove us home, we talked about it endlessly, trying to convince ourselves it was just some deranged woman living in the house. But there was one question that still haunts me to this day. What was she holding behind her back? And what if she was holding it the whole time we were walking, just waiting for the right moment to show us? What do you think was behind her back? Drop your theories in the comments below. Could it have been something ordinary? Or is it something far more sinister?